Maggie says she loves me.
Hey, this is a good thing. Something we don't get enough of these days. Enjoy it. And when we get back, return the favor. It's not like she's going anywhere.
One of my favourite episodes of TV is The Walking Dead Season 7 Episode 1. After a nearly 7-month-long cliffhanger, the show returned to reveal what would happen in the adaption of that iconic comic scene. It would of course be revealed that the first to go was Abraham. Then after Daryl lashes out at Negan, he would take out Glenn. By far the most shocking, sad and impactful fate I've seen in a show. At the time, I thought 701 was perfect. So well done. After such an episode, the show was changed forever, and what you had to look forward to from that is all that would happen during Negan's reign, and the group coming back from it. Rick would go on and beat Negan, and Maggie would go on and live for Glenn, and of course have Hershel. But over the years, actually witnessing what has come of that, no, I don't like it. Glenn getting his comic death was perhaps the most sensible thing to do, but the reality of the story in The Walking Dead, actually watching it with this happening, Maggie didn't become some naturally strong legacy holder of Glenn, but she's made in such a way that she's unaware and unlikable. She became much worse, and I don't like Hershel, and I'm not going to like him just because he's Glenn's son. I'd rather watch a world where instead of Maggie and Hershel, it was Glenn, and it just makes me think, what if it could be? In this video, we're going to be answering the question of what if Glenn didn't die. Let's get straight into it, of course. Before we do, make sure you press the like button and make sure you subscribe if you're new. So, we need to save Glenn from this scene. To do this, we still have to play by Negan's rules and the show's rules. Negan, not knowing that Maggie is pregnant, chooses to kill Maggie. The night before 701 actually aired, a supposed leak of the cliffhanger reveal was all over, and it did show Maggie dying. It said that each of the characters had their scenes filmed to avoid the leaks, many suggesting this was an intentional leak, so that people didn't know what actually happened. This helps. Glenn is knocked out.
When he moves, anybody says anything, cut the boy's another eye out, feed it to his father, and then we'll start. You can breathe. You can blink. You can cry. Hell, you're all gonna be doing that. Oh, look at that! Taking it like a champ!
In the episode before where Glenn does jump in, where Negan jokingly swings at Maggie, you actually saw that Abraham was ready to get involved. That's something that stands out to me as weird about that allegedly purposefully leaked scene, is that Abraham is just there. Again, he knows that he can't move, but he couldn't just sit and watch it even if he dies. He was the biggest and strongest there. Although Negan has unfortunately struck fatal blows into Maggie, Abraham charges into him and attempts to strangle Negan, and nearly does it, but to no avail. Dwight and the other saviors pull him away. To prove that even the strongest and the bravest of them can't beat Negan, he chooses Abraham as his second victim. At the end of the episode, broken by let alone the loss of the strongest guy he's ever met, but Maggie.
Oh, God. Bet you thought you were all gonna grow old together, sitting around the table at Sunday dinner in the happily ever after. No, doesn't work like that, Rick. Not anymore.
Glenn lived for Maggie. It's interesting because when Laurie died, Rick went into this similar episode, and it was Glenn that at first went into the prison to try and retrieve him, but Rick was completely out of it. He pushed Glenn away like he didn't even know him. Here, poetically, Rick tries to do the same, but Glenn isn't Glenn anymore. He punches Rick like Maggie did in the comics after Glenn died. He screams at Rick, "Why did you bring her here?" They all go back to Alexandria. No one goes to Hilltop. There's no need to now.
Let me put this to all of you as clearly as I can. I'm not in charge anymore. Negan is.
They discuss and argue that Glenn can't be here when Negan visits, not because they don't know what he'll do, but because they do know. With Enid and Glenn being close the season before, she volunteers to take Glenn to Hilltop, and Sasha volunteers to join her. She doesn't want to stay at Alexandria because she sees Abraham everywhere. Negan knows that his biggest threat right now is that angry widower. He knows that he was one of the people who tried to interrupt the lineup. He thinks maybe he should have considered killing him. When Negan does arrive earlier than expected, he asks where the widower is. Rick and Daryl don't say anything until Gabriel steps in and reveals that Glenn unalived himself a few days after Maggie's fate. Glenn, Enid and Sasha arrive at Hilltop. Now they brought him here in hopes to have him rehabilitate, but he spends most of his days training. He doesn't talk anymore. He's just clearly dead set on not just beating the saviors, but killing Negan. Because of this, he's largely kept out of the group's schemes. Daryl goes to Hilltop and eventually opens up about how sorry he is. Now obviously in this universe we're creating, he didn't punch Negan to cause him killing anyone, but he was the reason Glenn was even out there to see it. Daryl tries to take the blame, but Glenn says it wasn't his fault. At least he was even out there. Even after all the convincing that Sasha did to try and get Glenn to stand down, he catches her leaving. He knows she's heading to the sanctuary, so he joins her. It's here we start to hear more of the Glenn that we all know. They reminisce and even talk about college and how he used to love working at his dad's car store with his sisters. How even though it was part of the work experience program and wasn't being paid, it was his dream to work with cars.
Here's the registration, the window sticker, the receipt. Oh, and make sure you talk to the general manager. His name is Glenn.
He says that's partly why he loved being a pizza delivery driver so much. He was always driving. When they eventually get to the sanctuary, Sasha jumps over the fence, but doesn't let Glenn come over too.
Go. It's not your time.
Glenn had just opened up about how he loved cars. Sasha says, drive. Glenn goes on to see this as Sasha telling him there's so much more for him to do. She's lost Bob, Tyrese, now Abraham. She would go on to succumb to chasing vengeance and kicking off the war. But it's here that Glenn saw a future. Maybe he doesn't have to dig 2 graves and go after Negan. He just needs to stay calm and everything will be okay.
Stick to the plan. Don't engage.
And then, something happens! Where you at? Show your fucking face!
Someone pegged him good. Looked like just one guy from what I could tell.
Got you, mother.
There's so much in season 8 that I think Glenn would have benefited from and developed way more than Maggie. He definitely still had business in the show.
I know you.
Just like before.
Glenn, Negan killed his pregnant wife.
Put the gun down and, let's think this through.
You've got that scene with Rick and Morgan at the bar where they were captured by saviors, said they would help them, but then killed them all. Imagine Glenn there. A character like Glenn who was always against that, always wanted to do what's right.
Run, we can get by him. We gotta let those people out. That's still who we are. It's gotta be.
And it makes so much sense because when he invaded one of the savior outposts, that was his first kill, and that was right at the end of season 6, so we hadn't seen a Glenn that had killed for that long. So it makes sense that that would be the start of it. And then in this scene, where Glenn's just lost Maggie, Rick has just lost Carl, which I think he still would, by the way. Even if Glenn had killed Negan ages ago, like, that would still have happened because he was helping Sadiq. There's actually very few possible scenarios where Carl wouldn't be out in those woods with Sadiq. In fact, Glenn running around chasing vengeance would just make Carl want to help other people even more. It would have been amazing to see these 3 season 1 characters just turn into that. They'd all lost people, and this was the furthest they've ever gone in losing their humanity. And when they kill these saviors, he'd look in the mirror and just see a different Glenn, as the viewers have. And I think that's so much more interesting than anything Maggie has done since. He would rethink killing altogether. Like, maybe he won't kill Negan.
I lied.
After this.
And it's Carl's letter to Glenn that would give him that similar sort of influence that it had on Rick. Still wanting to kill Negan, but it's the only thing stopping him from not doing that.
This isn't about me.
Well, it's not what we thought it was. Hilltop the Saviors, it's bigger.
In the season 8 finale, Rick beats but spares Negan, and Glenn, while obviously disappointed, isn't as audible about it as you might think. Something doesn't seem right about him.
Rick was right about not killing all the saviors. Not about Negan. Rick was wrong to do what he did. Michonne too. We're gonna bide our time, wait for our moment. And then we're gonna show him.
4 months into Negan being in his cell, Glenn breaks in and kills Negan.
Knock, knock!
Oh, she just gave up the keys, huh? Oh.
Negotiations have ended.
The war was for nothing. Every person who died for nothing. Carl died for nothing.
Yeah. You keep telling yourself that, Rick.
1 year after Glenn killed Negan, Glenn paints. He's painted pictures of what his family would look like if they were still here, and he puts them in his Hilltop headquarters. And he still doesn't live back at Alexandria. He can't bear to go back there, so he lives at Hilltop. He also still doesn't feel any better. Painting helps, but killing Negan didn't do much for him. He almost feels more empty, as there's nothing left to hate, or to blame his constant hurt on. Now, Glenn isn't on great terms with Rick. Rick wanted to kill Negan too, but the whole reason he didn't, what it was all for, was for Carl, and now he feels like they all got their own way, but he didn't, and it was all for nothing. Now, you might be thinking, if Negan's already dead, then surely he wouldn't end up in that herd to get injured and then taken. And that's true. I mean, in an alternate universe, which is what we're talking about, you could just say Andrew Lincoln still wanted to leave and they would just find another way to do it.
There ain't no other way, man.
I'm not destroying the bridge.
But for the sake of this what if, let's actually just be really strict to the story and say that no, Rick wouldn't leave if Glenn survived because he wouldn't be in that situation. But I'll let that part be your teaser for my what if Rick stayed video. So we're not going to go into too much detail about Rick now. What's amazing about Rick not leaving and Maggie being dead apart from for obvious reasons, is we don't need a 6-year time jump, so Daryl wouldn't be out there looking for anyone for years. Leah doesn't need to exist, and nor does that horrible Reaper storyline. That's all gone. I've shat on it. So what would Glenn be like in the Whisperer story arc? What would his place be? Well, with Glenn residing at Hilltop, I think he'd be heavily involved with Lydia and Henry. What better character to peel back than Glenn, who lost his kid, who never even got to have that family with Maggie. Now he meets this Whisperer girl, the enemy. At first he's all hardened and horrible to her, but over time becomes the protector. Daryl can be there to scold Henry, but I think Glenn and Lydia, it makes a lot of sense with him and Enid. Perhaps even taking some of Rick's comic storyline, as Daryl heavily did. This would be the opportunity to have Daryl even step back a bit, have Glenn be somewhat of a leader, which he never really got to be. When that trade fair happened, it was Michonne that really didn't want it to happen for obvious reasons, with not really being safe. Glenn, as war-torn as he is now in the show, would be one of them that didn't really want that to happen either. In that scene where the Whisperers capture the main characters, you know, you've got Yumiko there for some reason. I've actually always thought that Magna was meant to die on the pikes because she was there. It actually feels like it was taken out last minute for her to be there randomly. Oh no, these people that I've known 10 minutes. Oh. I mean, of course you'd have that reaction to, you know, seeing these people's heads on the pikes, but it is a bit weird that she was there. This would be Glenn. She could pick anyone to take up onto that cliff edge to show the herd. Maybe she chooses Glenn as she sees he's the most honest one. So Glenn is there and he's massively affected by the pikes. Of course Henry is up there, so he's sad for Carol, but also Enid. So Glenn already has a motive in the Whisperer arc. I think he'd be right up there with Carol, supporting her as she chases vengeance. A massive difference to him in late season 6 where he was actively convincing Daryl not to do that. He would be the one to help kill Alpha. There wouldn't be a character being secretly assigned. Now even with characters like Carol pursuing Alpha to end all of it, we can't ignore the very important scenes that would happen before that. Rick would go into that camp and try to talk to them.
No waiting, you keep going. I'm going with you. You can't do this on your own.
Glenn, I can do this.
Remember, this is the Rick that has been trying to maintain all of the community, so of course he'd be straight into that Whisperer camp by himself, trying to make peace, to try and make it work. He doesn't want war. He doesn't want a repeat of what happened with Negan, especially after Carol and Daryl in that first episode of season 10 crossed Alpha's border. Rick would have to go and do that. When thinking of Rick, it's easy to think of him being crazy and angry and, you know, killing all of them. But no, not this Rick. It's after Carl died. We almost saw that Rick go into retirement. That's what the end of season 8 did. It was closure to that part of Rick's life. He now tries living peacefully for Carl, unless he needs to be otherwise. Especially with Negan dead, Rick would take it onto himself to make sure he can do what Carl wanted. That's where Rick's character was going to. It's here we'd see Glenn and Rick still caring about each other, even though Rick still thinks Glenn obviously overstepped massively. Glenn wants to go in there with him, but at this point this version of Glenn is the last thing Rick wants in there with him when he's going to talk to the Whisperers about peace. Now again, because Rick didn't leave, Michonne didn't either. That was such a massive part of season 10, but the whole Virgil thing wouldn't need to happen. So yeah, Virgil wouldn't exist, and by the end of the main show he didn't exist either, so we can forget about him altogether. And it's all of this that in fact makes the Commonwealth story arc come that much sooner. Now when I think of season 11, above the Commonwealth stuff was also the confirmation of the variants. Season 11 episode 19, where they basically said, you know, the zombies in season 1 and a bit of season 2, where they moved a bit faster, picked things up and climbed. That wasn't just a change in directing, that was canon. So would they still do that, or feel like they need to do that with Rick still in the show? I don't think the spin-offs would still happen, but would they really show different types of zombies? I think eventually, yeah. That Elijah character would not exist if Maggie was already dead or just wasn't there anymore. Just some NPC created for Maggie. You got to stop it. But Glenn being there would be better than all of it. Aaron said he only heard stories of walkers being more capable, but Glenn, he was there. He actually saw when the zombies were doing all of that. So instead of them reacting like it's something brand new, we'd see through Glenn what the situation really was. A reminder, the return of them acting like that. To see a season 1 character react and recall it, I think beats any contrived appearance of them that happened in season 11. Lydia became so useless that they got rid of an arm just to do something. So if Glenn was still in the show, there wouldn't be an Elijah. Lydia, and Lydia wouldn't be useless. In this scene, it would be Glenn there. I think everything Glenn's been through in the show now is, of all things, he'd be stubborn, so he'd be right there in Maggie's place when Daryl and Lance confront them. Not that we can put Glenn in Maggie's shoes, but I just think that's where he would be. With this more impulsive Glenn, I think it does open doors to stuff like Dwight's comic death. Dwight had just lost Sherry, and this was him trying to kill Pamela, trying to cut the snake's head off and end the corruption altogether. With Rick and Michonne there, it would be a much more fulfilling Commonwealth arc. So I can actually see Dwight's comic death as something that Glenn could have gotten. But I think we have to be realistic about it. We have to look at who Glenn is now in this timeline, and we have to look at how Glenn was from season 1 to 7 to really get to the bottom of what his ending would be. Again, there's no spin-offs. If Rick and Michonne was still in the show, if Glenn was still there, Maggie's dead, Negan's dead, where would Glenn end up? Going into the Commonwealth story arc, they all entered this time where they could be more comfortable. They don't have to be so on edge. By the end of the main show, they did all live pretty normal lives. And at that table at the end, Glenn would be there. They would have gotten rid of all of the corruption in the Commonwealth and taken ownership of it. And so from there, they can do what they had always wanted to do. And I think Glenn would still be haunted by Maggie. You know, he's stuck in this place where he sees her everywhere. He's staying at Hilltop. But I don't think it would fit him for long. So with them all being free to do what they'd always wanted to do, we look back at what Glenn was like in season 1. I think he'd want to leave. He's so haunted by Maggie and what happened to her. He's become this tortured, haunted version of what he was and of what he stood for. So I think drawing back to what Sasha told Glenn just before she died, Glenn should just drive. I think the end of Glenn's story is he gets in his car and leaves. It's over.
Maybe we'll get to steal another one someday.
She said, in my heart and in my head, tell me why this has to end. Oh no, oh no, I can't save us. My Atlantis we fall. We build this town on shaky ground. I can't save us. My Atlantis, oh no.
So this is what I think would happen if Glenn survived in The Walking Dead, but we'll never know for sure. I prefer Glenn over Maggie. I think Glenn is easily the better character. I think it was sensible what happened. I think it was so good, so well done. I hate to love it. But to me, it's because of what followed, what happened after this. You know, everything Maggie's ever done since. Maybe, just maybe, Glenn was meant to go on in a TV show. But at some point, it became a bit clear that Glenn was going to die because he was just the supporting character of Maggie. It quickly switched.
He wants to talk to Maggie. You got this?
Where it was like, yeah, Maggie, you go and talk to Gregory. You go and be the leader of Hilltop. So I don't think Maggie will ever die now. Glenn will go down as having one of the most iconic fates in TV history. In the end, it's just a shame what that was a catalyst for. What do you think? Do you think Glenn was always meant to die in that lineup? Or do you think he should have went on? Do you agree with what I've said would happen? Do you prefer this timeline? What do you think would happen if Glenn stayed? Do you think we could see Glenn again, with a Tales of the Walking Dead episode for Glenn set before the apocalypse being an actual idea that's been brought up? Let me know what you think down below. Press the like button on the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're new. Thank you for watching. I'll see you soon.